Hello guys and girls, welcome to another episode of DarkTide FlyFishing. My name is Jack Lotta and today I'm going to take you through a BDSM fly tutorial. We're going to start off with our hook. I've already placed it in the vise. This is a B10S size 2 from Gamakatsu. The reason why I use a B10S 2 is because of the underslung eyes and the rolling beads on the bottom. I want to make sure that it's got a slightly wider gap than your size 4 and your size 6, just to help purchase in the fish's mouth when you set the hook. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my thread, and I'm going to come forward a little bit, leaving a little gap in between the eye and where I'm going to attach my voodoo eyes, so that at a later stage I don't crowd that hook eye. I'm going to get my 5mm voodoo eyes. I'm going to invert the hook and I'm going to set those, portion them more or less where I want them. Some figure of 8 wraps, between 10 and 15 wraps. I'm then going to look at it from another angle just to ensure that they're nice and straight. And I'm then going to come up underneath and I'm going to cinch those thread wraps nice and tight. 5 over the one side, 5 over the other side. Check again, and then at this particular point what I'll do is I'll add some Loctite. Helps keep it in place. I'll once again turn the hook upside down. Right, at this particular point I'm going to wrap back towards the hook point, and I'm going to stop just short of the hook point. Okay, at this point what I'm going to do is we are going to do a little fly tying hack called the anti-rabbit strip tail wrap hack. It's quite a mouthful. I'm cutting a section of stiff fluorocarbon. This is 30 pound. I'm going to start off by laying it on the side of the hook shank closest to you guys or the camera. And then I'm going to extend it slightly back over the back of the hook. This is going to act as a post with which we're actually going to attach our rabbit strip. Check more or less where you want that. Trim your excess, and then once again I'm just going to add a little dab of Loctite. Okay, at this point I'm taking my rainbow crystal flash. I've got 2 strands. Right, the magic number I think for this fly is in between 2 and 4, so I'm going to use 4 strands for this fly. I'm going to double up those strands around my thread, and I'm going to position them exactly where I want them. A few wraps. Okay, trim the desired length, and at this point I'm going to put my rabbit tail in. When I'm putting my rabbit tail, I prefer to use the Magnum Zonka in lieu of regular Zonka, because it's a nice thick strip, which means that it's you're not going to get mangy rabbit hair, and it also it doesn't flap around as aggressively in the water. You want good movement. You want this to look like a bait fish, not like a snake. I'm going to measure out more or less where I want this, and when I trim the rabbit I want to bring the scissors in very close to the strip, so that I don't trim any of the fibers. And before I tie it in, I'm also going to trim a little V in the back of the rabbit strip, just to help with the taper of that fly. Again, take our scissors, place it flat up against the strip, and cut into a V. That's going to prevent you from cutting through the fiber, which we want to keep. Okay, and at that particular point we've got a nice sort of V. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that magnum and I'm going to pinch it down over the hook shank, and I'm going to secure it with a few wraps. Okay. Just like that. At this particular point, I'm going to lick my fingers. I'm going to pull those fibers back and out of the way, and I'm once again going to invert the hook shank, and I'm going to show you a hack we use to prevent that that rabbit strip from wrapping. So I learned this from Tim Babbage, who is a renowned fly angler guide and largie fisherman. What I'm doing is I'm using some UV knot sense, but you can use solar res, whatever you'd prefer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little globule of this UV knot sense, and I'm actually going to glue it when it decides to come out. A little over the flash, over the rabbit strip, and again over that little fluoro post. Make sure I don't get any of that in my fibers. There we go. And then I'm going to hit that with a UV torch, just like that. And what this is going to do for me is it's going to keep all the movement of the rabbit that we want, but that is never under any circumstances going to wrap irritatingly around the hook point. Right, at this point we invert the hook once again to the correct, should we say, anatomical tying position. And what I'm going to do here is I'm now going to add the marabou undertail. I like using bright fluorescent colors. Okay, I think the contrast of this pattern is a little bit more important than the color specifics. I'm going to select a little tuft of marabou. I'm just going to use the actual marabou tips themselves. And before I trim it, I'm just going to measure out more or less where I want them. Okay, and I want them extending maybe 3 millimeters out the back of the hook. Like that. Portion them nicely on either side of the hook. Tie those down. Just like that. Okay. Now at this particular point, we once again invert. I'm using a brown marker in lieu of a black marker. You can choose what you like, but this particular permanent marker is a Faber-Castell or Faber-Castell, or however you say it. It's got a very thin tip. And the great thing about this is that when I'm applying the bars to that marabou with a thinner tip, there's less chance of that marabou wicking up that permanent marker and sucking up or soaking up all of that brown color and getting rid of the chartreuse, which we don't want. So use very light strokes when you're applying these bars or these lines. Okay. Just like that, and I'm going to do the same for the other side. Really just helps make that fly pop a bit, which helps create the illusion of movement. Okay, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in my 7-strand wire, which I'm going to use to attach the rolling beads. I did historically use braid, but I found that that wasn't as durable as the wire, it tended to slip. So this is 7-strand wire, bite wire. I'm laying that flat along the base of the hook shank right up until the eye, so that there's as much surface area as possible, less chance of this slipping when I attach it, nice and tight. Don't want that going anywhere. I'm going to add some more Loctite. Okay. And then I'm going to tie in some body braid to make a little hot butt. I'm using orange. Just like that. Okay. Now this little butt is not big by any means. I'm using this mainly to cover up the little nub that I have here in thread. Okay, so it's a couple turns, maybe 3 or 4 at the most, just to cover up that little nub as best as possible. Make sure that you're doing this nicely from every angle. Nice tight wraps. Just like that. Okay, now what I like to do here once more is take a little bit of Loctite and I actually run that into the body braid just to prevent that from moving or slipping or going anywhere. Okay, right. At this particular point, you can tie in your brush. I'm going to get a little bit creative with this video. I'm going to tie in 2 brushes and I'm going to palmer them forward at the same time, again just to add some additional contrast to the fly. You can use a single brush color, that's fine. Obviously I'm just giving you guys something a little bit more special. These are the 2-inch streamer brushes from Fishient. I'm attaching them both to one another. Okay, I'm going to have the olive on the outside, or the camo on the outside, and the black on the inside. Okay, and I'm going to tie them down on my side of the hook. And I'm going to wrap forward in anticipation. Now what I'm going to do prior to wrapping these streamer brushes is I'm just going to tease out the fibers. Okay, make sure that they're not trapped, and then I'm going to wrap forward as I am here and palmer those fibers backwards with my left hand. Now the key with this fly is you don't want a massive huge deer hair head, so I actually start stacking very close to the eyes, as you'll see. I'm going to do one more wrap. That. Brush these fibers out of the way and I'm going to secure this like that. Okay, use your side cutters to cut your brush, not your nice scissors. Okay, and I'm just going to tie that tag end down slightly, make it a little bit neater, and at this particular point I'm going to whip finish. And I'm going to trim my thread. Okay, I'm using a dog brush. You can use a dubbing brush just to help tease out these fibers, or the wing the brush. Okay, and you can see that nice mottled color I've got there with the brushes in lieu of just using one brush. Very cool, very natural color that's just going to add contrast and make that fly pop a little bit more. Once I've brushed them out and I've teased those materials out, I'm going to take my scissors. I'm going to turn the fly on its side and I'm going to tease the material, or sorry, the brush fibers on the side and on the bottom downward in such a way that my hot spot and my marabou tail with the bars is visible from the side and it's not being covered by that brush. Otherwise that becomes quite redundant. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I want to make sure that I can see those. I'm going to tease all of that material up. And then what I'm going to do at this point is come in with my scissors, lay them flat against my dumbbell eyes, and then just trim off this material, which I no longer need. As you can see, we've got a nice wing that blends into the tail, but we can also see our hot spot and we can see our barred marabou. At this point, I use a GSP 200 denier thread. Okay, infinitely better for spinning deer hair. It doesn't break. It's got a slightly thicker, well, it does break, but you have to use inordinate amounts of power to break that. Probably bend the hook first. And it's got a nice flat surface so it doesn't cut into your deer hair while you're spinning it. Okay. I'm just going to reapply my thread. Right up against the brush. Okay. Now, at this particular point, you want to make sure that you've also got a very nice collar that blends back into the wing of the fly. So I'm going to use a hair stacker. You don't have to use a hair stacker. Okay, I'm using regular deer hair here because I quite like that mottled appearance, and I think that that makes the fly pop quite nicely. A good example is a fly that I tied here earlier. Here I used a pink hot butt, but you can see how nicely that mottled deer hair and that collar really sort of makes that fly pop. So I'm using a mottled olive. I'm going to take a nice big clump of this. Okay, and I'm going to try and get rid of all the junk base sort of fibers at the base of that deer hair, which sort of impede the spinning process or the flaring process. And I'm going to place that inside my hair stacker as such. Feed them in there. Okay, I've now got all the tips lined up. Okay, you can see, go through there. If you've got any square tips you don't want, you can work them out. Really get those with OCD going. And what I'm going to do at this particular point is I'm going to position the collar slightly shorter, maybe 5 millimeters shorter or 3 millimeters shorter than my wing. I'm going to place it on the top of the hook shank. Keeping it there with my left hand. I'm just going to neaten up those sections there of the tag end. I'm going to bring my thread up, 2 loose open wraps, and keeping my left hand there, I'm going to flare that. I don't want it to spin, I want it to flare. I'm going to pull that nice and tight. Okay, just manipulate those materials where I want them. I'm going to come through. I'm going to give one more wrap with the thread just to secure it, but notice how I'm turning my thread or wiggling my thread in such a way that I'm not trapping any additional fibers. Okay, and then I'm just going to brush the tag ends away from the tips because I don't want to interfere with my collar. You can see what a very nice collar going on there. Okay, Okay, you can feed it around a little bit, just manipulate it with your fingers before the next step. And then what I'm going to do at this particular point, because I want to get that contrast, is I'm going to take some black deer body hair, a nice thick clump, and again, just to help build into that collar. When I lay this down, these deer hair pieces are pretty much flush already, these tips. Work out all the junk in the base of the deer hair. I'm going to lay this one very, very slightly less than the previous collar. Now, again, come in here with your fingers, separate the tags from the tips, take the black, lay it down marginally shorter than the previous post or the previous collar, the olive collar. One open wrap, a second open wrap, and keeping your left hand there, I'm then going to draw it tight as I have there, nice and tight. Okay, and that third wiggling wrap just to secure that all down. Okay, now once again, at this point, come in here with your fingers and do your very best to try and separate the butts. Use your scissors if you have to, the butts from the tag. Okay, I'm now gonna invert my fly upside down. Okay, and I really want this particular fly pattern to pop. So I'm going to add a light color on the bottom. Okay, this is a gray. It's the underbody of the fly. I'm going to select a nice big clump of deer gray body hair, or gray deer body hair. Again, this collar on the bottom is also quite important. So I want to line those tips up right sort of to where the bend of the hook starts. Okay, lay that flat, secure it with my left hand, and in exactly the same fashion we did the last couple turns, it'll be one turn, wiggle it so we don't trap any fibers, another turn, and then we pull that nice and tight, and that also flares the way we want it. Invert the hook once again to the correct tying position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and pull or manipulate all of these fibers back as best as possible using my fingertips. Maybe even come in here with my scissors and just manipulate that so all of those fibers are being pushed back and my next stack is not going to interfere with the one that was preceding it. Okay, now at this point our collar's more or less set. We don't really need to worry about the tips of the deer hair anymore. Take a nice big clump. Okay. Work all that junk out at the base of the deer hair. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to just cut those tips off. So I've just got a clump like that. Once again, brush all of those materials back. You don't want to trap any of them. Some cheeky little ones there on the bottom there that are not making my life very easy. I'm just going to have to come in here and play around with my scissors. lay the deer hair on the top. One wrap. Second wrap. And before I pull straight, I'm just going to feed it out onto either side of the hook shank. Again, take my fingers, secure it, pull all that stuff out of the way, and I'm going to draw that tight like that. Okay. And once again, want to put in a nice little black bar in there. So what I'll do is I'll take, this is a tip that I learned from FlyFish Food, which is a great social media platform for fly ties. If you're not following them already, I highly recommend that you do. And I'm basically just going to take my finger and push down like that into those fibers. Okay, making a nice little flat spot where I can add my clump of black, my black bar. Okay, take another nice big section. Of black. Work out that junk material at the base. Okay. Trim those ends. And then take these and I'm going to lay them inside that little area that I just made, like that. Let's bring my thread up, wiggle it so I don't trap any of those fibers. Wiggle it on the way down. That's one. Do the same thing again. That's two. And then taking my left hand and pulling those fibers up to prevent that from wrapping around the hook shank, I'm then just going to pull that down nice and tight and cinch that as I have. Just like that. Okay, invert the hook shank. Those fibers out of the way. Bleeding a little bit into the bottom. It's okay. Nice big clump of gray. Once more. I'm not going to cut the tips off this one, I don't think it's necessary. Lay that flat. Bring that thread up, wind it once. Wind it a second time, loosely, and then spin it and draw it tight. Nice and tight as such. Okay. At this particular point, I'm going to bring my thread up and I'm going to try and articulate my thread around the dumbbell eye, wiggling it so I don't trap any of those deer hair fibers. I'm going to do a couple of wraps behind the eye, and I'm just going to take some super glue, some Loctite, pull those fibers back, add a little bit of that super glue. Try not to get that in your hook eye. I'm going to let that sink in there a little bit, and then I'm just going to come in and cut that. Right. At this point, we're going to use a blade to trim our fly. Okay. I'm keeping it in the vise. I think that this actually helps quite a bit in terms of the consistency of the cuts. And all of the cuts that I'm going to do it at an angle, and I'm going to use the eye of the hook and the dumbbell eyes to sort of cut a wedge shape into the BDSM fly. So I'm going to start off with a cut at a sort of 45-degree angle coming up and into the fly like that. I'm going to work into it again. I'm going to turn the fly on its side. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use the eyes as a sort of anchor. Also coming out at a slight angle so that I get that wedge shape in the fly. On the bottom, I want the bottom to be quite flat. Again, I said I don't want those rolling beads, those underslung eyes, nor the deer hair to impede the hook purchase in the fish's mouth. So this one's going to be a lot flatter on the bottom. Lay that flat against the dumbbell eyes and push back. Okay, don't go too far back. You don't want to trim into your collar. And then once more on this side, using the eyes, I'm going to come up and cut at an angle. Right, so it looks like quite a mess, but at this particular point, I'm going to come up with my razor again using the eyes, and I'm going to smooth off all of those square edges as best as possible, and I'm going to start shaping this fly the way that I want it. Working your way back into the fibers, but doing your very best not to cut into that collar. So work back slowly. Okay, at this particular point, we've got much more of a nice sort of bait fish profile. You've got a nice collar that blends into a nice sort of mottled wing, which goes into our rabbit, which we'll unwrap. Okay, what I'll do at this particular time is I'll also just come in here with my scissors and I will clear up the eye of deer hair. Nice square cuts. Okay, and at that particular point, I'm going to take my GSP thread off. I'm going to reattach my flat waxed. Just like that. Okay, I'm going to invert the fly once more. And at this point, I'm going to attach my rolling beads. I'm using the rolling beads here. These are 2mm or 2.5. I'm using 3 of those in lieu of one big one, again because the surface area is a lot less, which again is going to impede that hookup rate, or a smaller bead is going to prevent that hook from coming out of the fish's mouth. Okay, the bigger the bead is, the more surface area it's going to have, and the less gap we have on that hook. Okay, I've attached 2. I'm going to attach another one to get that out here. So this is going to help these underslung beads not only add a nice trigger point, but they're going to offset the neutral buoyancy of the deer hair, which is going to make this thing swim a lot better. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to equally distribute the deer hair. Okay. Pull those beads back. Feed that through the eye of the hook. Okay. And then see more or less, try and position that wire where I want it as equally as possible. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm going to pull it down nice and tight. Keeping it tight, I'm going to invert the fly once more. I'm going to pull that 7-strand wire back, and this is where I'm going to attach, or I'm going to wrap it down with my thread nice and tight, like that. Okay, pull it back, trim that with your side cutters. And at this particular point, I'm going to whip finish. You'll notice how I haven't applied the weed guard yet. Okay, I'm going to take my Loctite again, lightly apply that to the thread wraps, making sure I don't get any in my hook eye. Okay, and then I'm just going to come in and do a final little once over with my blade. Smooth out all those edges, just make that fly really pop. And then of course, looking at this fly from multiple angles, I want to try and trim the underbody in such a way that those beads are visible from the side. Just be careful that you don't chip the paint off those tungsten beads. Okay, at this particular point, I'm going to add, in my weed guard. I like using a double weed guard. If you guys have followed my weed guard hack, you'll see a nice, quick, easy way to apply a single weed guard. I'm going to show you how to apply a double weed guard. Okay, just extra insurance when you're fishing a lot of structure and you're getting your fly in the tree quite often, or alternatively you are fishing quite rocky river system. So once again, this is 30-pound fluoro. Mono burns a little bit better, but this is nice and stiff. You'll notice that I've got a little bit of a memory already in that line, and I'm going to use that to my advantage when apportioning this weed guard. So I'm going to cut a little piece. I'm going to burn the end, or singe the end. And then push it up against the thread wraps and the dumbbell eye. That's one. I'm now going to take another piece which has ricocheted off into the distance. So trim down this one here. Do the same one for this piece. Put that on the other side, up against the hook and against the eye. Then I'll take my solar rays thin. I'll put my solar rays thin and I'll try and get it into a little bit into the deer hair, over that wire, to make sure that that's extra secure. All over that weed guard, up against the dumbbell eyes. And before I hit that with a torch, I'm just going to make sure that that weed guard is in more or less the area that I want it, or the position that I want it. And then hit it with a torch. And the final phase is just to take some solar res thick and layer that over the thin just to reinforce those weed guards. Make sure that those don't go anywhere. This, in essence, is your BDSM fly. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure the weed guard, pull it up slightly, make sure it's extends a couple millimeters past the hook point. One, obviously I've got the other one to measure up against, so I'll trim that as well. I'll then separate those more or less where I want them. Just get that memory in the right place. And what I will do is I will make a very slight bend in the weed guard, just on the tip, to almost give these weed guards the tips little feet. That's one. Try and bend the other piece more or less the same. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, is effectively our Befok Deerhair Sex Muis.